Reviewing the drainage areas. So let's go through here and let's select one of those drainage areas. And in your dynamic toolbar, you have the physical properties of it. You can do a graph, utility properties, and you can delete that drainage area. So if I select the first one that says properties, this will give me the physical properties of that particular drainage area. It gives me the scale of it, whatever the area of it is, what method that it's using for the runoff method, which is the rational method. Of course, these are grayed out because we can't change it in this location, but at least gives you some general information about that particular drainage area. Also, the feature definition, you could come in here and change it in this location. Same thing for the feature name. If you want to name something different, you could name it there. The catchment intensity and so forth, that has not been defined yet because we haven't computed the network yet. So some of these values will not be available as of yet. But this at least gives you the physical properties of that particular area. Now if I go ahead and select that drainage area again, and I go to the utility properties of it, underneath the drainage tab, this will give me the hydraulic aspects of that particular drainage area. So if I scroll down through here, you're going to see that underneath the runoff, and that's probably the area that you'd want to concentrate on, you see what method that's using, which is the rational method, which is normally what you're going to use if it's under 200 acres. And since we're dealing with a stormwater drainage network in this particular situation, you just leave it set to that. You got your rational C, which is the default, which is 1. We'll leave it set to that. You'll see that the runoff coefficient, there's nothing there yet. And we'll come back to that here in a second. And also your time and concentration, depending on what your time and concentration is for how long that water is going into that particular inlet. And that is one thing that you will need to do for your drainage areas. Whenever you're using it, you will need to come in here and put in what that time and concentration is. And there's many different ways you can do it, but this is a number that you will need to put in there. And if it's below 5 minutes, you just leave it set to 5. But if it's longer than that, you would need to put in that correct number inside of here. That way it's computing the water correctly on how long it takes for that water from the longest point to get to that particular inlet or flared in section or whichever drainage structure that it is. That is something that you do need to be aware of. Now the other thing is, since we put in these drainage areas, we use the land use cover areas to define our C value, but that C value is not defined yet. Well, in order for that to show up, what you need to do is come up to the analysis tab, and underneath the compute, if you click on the down arrow, you have two different options. You have one that says compute scenario, which we'll talk about later on, but then there's one that says compute hydrology. And if you do that, it'll actually go through there and look at those drainage areas and compute the hydrology of those. So let me go ahead and do that. Looks like everything was computed. There was no errors with that, so I'll go ahead and click on OK. And now if I go back to that particular drainage area and go to the utility properties of it, it should show me, which it does, for that runoff coefficient, it gives me that number of what it thinks it should be from those two land use areas that I defined earlier. So that's where that number comes into effect. And of course, there are some other hydraulic aspects of that. But since we haven't computed an actual rainfall event yet, these numbers are not going to be available. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So these are some of the physical properties along with the hydraulic properties of a drainage area that you would need to review and change if needed.